ANA eLearning Academy is brought to you by CDN Graysheet, a trusted source of rare coin and currency valuations since 1963.
Today we have Vic Agha, who will be presenting on damaged goods. You will be muted during this presentation, so if you have any questions, please put them into the chat or the Q&A, and I will read them at the end. And without further ado, here's Vic.
All right, we're good to go. All right, everybody, my name is Vic Agha. This is the first time I've done a presentation at this level, let's say. I've done a lot for my local coin club. They love it quite a bit, and this is actually an updated version of one of the presentations that I have done for my club. This here, this presentation is meant to challenge what you think of when you think about what is okay to collect and what's not. I will explain what exactly I have in mind when I say damaged goods at the very beginning, because you know, you may or may not realize what I have in mind when I say it. I do have some specific things in mind in that regard. Okay, so pretty much everything you will see here today would be considered a details piece if you tried to submit it for grading. Not literally everything, but most of everything. What that really means is that everything you're going to see here are coins or currency that have been physically altered in some way after leaving the mint. The thing is, I'm not necessarily talking about you cleaning a coin or coins that have been nicked or damaged or bent or corroded. So for example, this here, somebody really did a disservice to this 1909 SVDB penny. Don't do that. It's not going to make it more valuable. Instead, I'm talking about things more like this. The coins that were cut down to make change, repousses, alterations of many different kinds. Just to give you an idea of the type of things you will see. Okay, so to start us off, we start with something simple, cuts and clips. This is one of those things that we don't think about too much these days because coins don't have the same physical meaning that they used to in centuries past. But it was very often the case that coins used to be cut to make change because once upon a time that actually meant something. The Tibetan coins, which you saw one slide ago, are an example of this. A very well-known example of this would be, of course, the pieces of 8. Even large cents. I have been told by somebody who knows quite well that prices back in the colonial days went down to a quarter of a cent. You'll notice, of course, we never issued a quarter of a cent. They actually physically cut the pennies to make those. A lot of people also would cut and clip coins in order to cheat the system in varying ways. For example, people would trim some of the coin off if it was silver and hoard it for them. This here, on this side, was part of what they called the toenail hoard, which was discovered in England about 6 years ago. That particular hoard became famous for just how big it was, because that kind of stuff was punishable by death at the time. We also had other neat things going on in the colonies here. For example, we had some very creative cutting, like this Curacao piece. What they did was they managed to take an 8 reals, they cut it into fifths, and then call it a 3 real. Well, you'll notice that 3 times 5 is 15 reals, which is a good twice as valuable as its original value. That was one of the many, many, many ways we had historically of devaluing coins. The irony now, of course, is those kind of pieces are so rare, they're worth a ridiculous amount of money on the occasions that they do come out there. Reparations. So, because back in the day, and in some parts of the world, including the modern time, money was a very difficult thing to make. Currencies would often be repaired to extend their lives. For example, the colonial notes, This particular one has a backing to it. I don't have that on the, you'd see it if you saw the reverse of this piece, and then actually had a nail put through it to help hold it together and make it last longer. And I mean, it worked, it survived to the modern day. That's that kind of thing. While it's not a big deal the way it used to be, it certainly is applicable to today, because if you know even the slightest bit about what's going on in Zimbabwe with their money, they have a serious issue there, because the American money is getting so heavily used that they're trying very hard to make it last longer. There are actually people who have made a business of buying American dollars for less than their face value, repairing them, and then putting them back into circulation, to give you an idea. They call it money laundering, because that's literally what they do with the money. Holes. There are quite a few of these. I'm sure these don't really need an introduction, but some of these are quite neat, at least the official ones. For example, places like Australia issued what they call holy dollars. And the idea here was, back when Australia was being established as a colony, they wanted the money to stay in the colony. So they intentionally cut a piece out of it that discouraged it from being exported, and that gave them money to circulate through the colony, at least until they could establish their own mints and the likes. It used to be that around the 1930s or so, there were actually stories in Australian newspapers about those going, I had a bucket of washers and I was looking through it and I accidentally found one of those. And those actually, the rarest and most valuable of those will sell for a couple $100,000. So that would actually have been quite a find. I doubt that that kind of thing happens these days, though. On a related note, on the other side of the world, in Greenland in 1926, they issued a 25-oar coin that after they issued, they put a hole in it. The idea here was they did it specifically because it was so similar to another coin of the time that they did it to just help distinguish between them. And when it comes over to currencies, India, when they issue their currency, they often staple them in bundles and they often have staple holes in them. That's the kind of thing you avoid with American currency and so on. But if you ever look just for Indian currency, they almost always have staple holes in it. They've been, the Bank of India has told them, no, we don't want you to do this, stop doing this. I don't think it's really made a difference. Unofficial holes, let's say. These are often related to jewelry or similar things to that. There are different types of holes that you will see, and they very much indicate different things. For example, the holes can be paired up like this. That suggests it was on a bracelet. Those kind of things look neat, but I don't think they end up being popular to wear. I know this from where I've worked in the past, where people would actually buy similar things and then return them very commonly. If you've got a single hole on the side, that often indicates that it was used as an earring to some effect. If you've got something to this effect, they look like mounting marks. These would have been part of a brooch, most likely. A lot of those end up having the pin on those removed. Every once in a while, you get neater pieces like this one here. This one here I thought was really, really neat. I've actually asked over there at a local historical society over in Bournemouth, England, what this was, but they couldn't quite give me an answer for this. On top of being holed, this looks like it was meant to be like a serious memento, because it's actually engraved Bournemouth WPP, August of 1894. And this itself is a 3 pence from 1763. Continuing on with the holes, well, large copper cents were often used to this effect. A single hole in the center suggests that somebody drilled it and turned it into a washer. And that's actually something I'm going to come back to at the end, because there's something important I want to say about that particular one. If you've got a pair of holes in the center, those were often done to string a coin onto what they called a humdinger, which was a little children's toy. I've also seen people suggest that those kind of things where you've got two holes in the center have been used as curtain weights as well. If you've got more than that, like 3 or 4 holes, there's a really good chance that that coin could have been used as a makeshift button. Then again, people putting holes into coins is a very common thing, so it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It would kind of depend on the specific coin. But to that end, people would use large cents for many, many, many reasons. If it's got a ridged edge, that often indicates that somebody was carving it into a gear, or if you've got an alternating edge, might be hard to tell from this picture, so I put it looking on the side here. That suggests that this was once used as a pie crimper wheel. We, of course, have no shortage of coins that are still on the pie crimpers or similar to that effect. I honestly, sometimes I look at them and wonder how so many people have them, because when I saw these first a few years ago, they were like news to me. But these are pretty well known among the numismatic community as a whole. This one here is a pie crimper on a metal handle. This one here, because this is a 2-cent coin, which was carved up into more of a spikes. They said it was used to mark spaces for stitching leather. This one here was one that was featured in the Asylum about, what was it, 2 months ago, I think, or so. This one here is a pie crimper that was mounted on an antler handle, of all things. That kind of stuff where people would use large copper coins and turn them into gears and crimpers and similar things was very common back in the day, because back in the day you didn't have all those stuff just readily available, and that was often the cheapest way of making such a thing. Copperheads. This here is from a pamphlet that is available on the internet. I don't remember where exactly, but I'm sure it's out there if you look for it, ebook of Copperheads. Take a look at this. This was a poem that they wrote back in the day. The traitor our common sense mars, and on liberty plainly he wars, taking freedom away from the union, I say, when he cuts out her head from the stars. And you can see very clearly a large cent here. The idea here was, of course, Southern sympathizers were called Copperheads, named after the snake, of course, but the Copperheads took that much more literally. So in order to identify themselves, they started doing this. They started cutting out the Liberty heads on large cents, fashioning them into pins, and then they would wear those pins when they would gather. That kind of thing was both relatively common and also extremely controversial during the Civil War. I'm sure that's not surprising anybody. But they actually, this one here is an article, again, from a newspaper now available online from 1863, where a company in New York called Bromley and Company claimed that they were the first ones to manufacture these sorts of things. They were offering them in bulk. So you could, according to their advertisement, they'd sell you one of these for 15 cents or $10 per 100. That suggests to me that at least at some point or another, these were quite common. They seem to be fairly rare these days. I'm not sure, I don't necessarily know if there's any way of telling how many were made, much less how many survived to the modern day. But just to give you an idea of how that kind of thing went back in those days. Scratches. Well, certainly you don't want to scratch your coins like this. This particular coin here was graded graffiti, VG details, because of the X marks that were scratched around the date, and that also happened on the reverse as well. Graffiti, when the graders grade it, they define it as significant and distracting etchings on a coin surface. So while a single scratch would still qualify the coin to be details, it wouldn't necessarily be labeled graffiti. Now, of course, you generally don't want that kind of stuff. You don't want coins that were simply scratched. But on the other hand, coins were often used as mementos of many, many different kinds. And these are the kinds that are quite neat, at least I think so. For example, this one here I got, this is on a British silver florin. It's a memento of a man named George Clark, who lived from 1851 to 1940, just to give you an idea. And on the other side, it's just like a regular florin. This one here is considerably older. It's one of ours. And the person, we certainly can't trace it when the person says mom on it, but somebody made it to remember his or her mother, who apparently lived from 1799 to 1840. This kind of stuff sometimes changes over the years as far as standards go, because what's happened here is up to about the year 2000 or so. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with these, with the chop marks. When our trade dollars were sent over to China, they would often be marked as such to verify that they were silver and good coins. It used to be that up until about the year 2000 or so, if you submitted a chop marked coin for grading, it would usually end up like this. Like Anex, what they would do is they would always grade it MS60 and details. These days, standards have actually changed, and these are much more accepted for what they were at the time. So, just to give you an idea of how standards will change, often certain coins will end up becoming very heavy with chop marks. You can probably kind of see how this coin started bending under the pressure that they put under so many of them. Political scratchings. This is a fun one, to be sure. There are more of these than this, of course, but it is semi-often that you see coins being used to carry political messages to varying extents. This often involves, taking, because when it comes to coins, you're often got images of whoever's in power at the time, and if people don't enjoy that, they will take it out on the coin. For example, over here, somebody on a forum posted this, suggesting that the reason that the ETA of this particular coin was not scratched out was because it was meant to represent the Basque separatist movement. In the 1981 IRA hunger strike in Ireland, there were a few people who died from that, and coins started being stamped with their names as a symbol of this. On the currency side, when the Shah in Iran was overthrown, they did this sort of thing. They stamped out his face with a design, or they started putting other messages on it to down with Pahlavi, down with USA, down with Israel. Not surprising considering that sort of thing is coming from Iran. Hobo nickels. Now, just so you all know, just an FYI, in exactly 1 week from right now, there's actually going to be a presentation on nothing but hobo nickels. It will be presented by Abigail Zekman, and I'm sure she's going to go into considerably more detail than I am going to right now. But just to give you an overview of that kind of thing, hobo nickels probably started with buffalo nickels. And the idea was simply, you just carve the coin into an image. There is quite a variety of images on the hobo nickels, some nice, some naughty, let's say. You would often see pictures of the Native American being carved into different things. Carving the Native American out into like a skull is a very common thing when carving out coins. This particular one, though, is a replica. And on a similar note, they used to do these with quite a few other coins. You may or may not have heard of the potty dollars, where when they took seated Liberty dollars, they carved it so that you would be sitting on a chamber pot as well. There is a society dedicated to collecting and studying hobo nickels, and that's called the Original Hobo Nickel Society. Love tokens. These are another very common thing, at least these kind here. The most common of the love tokens would probably be this kind, the Liberty design on a dime. What would normally happen was you would plane off one side of the coin and then have initials carved into it. It is believed that when it comes to love tokens, they probably started with a French coin that was called a treizain. This happened during the medieval times and just continued throughout the centuries. These kind of things were popular with the British, and by the time of the Civil War, they started showing up in the US more and more and more and more. And while it's silver dimes that are the most common when it comes to this sort of thing, these kind of things can be found in pretty much every coin you can think of and then some. Much like with the hobo nickels, we have a society that is dedicated to nothing but love tokens. Just to give you an idea of some of the things that you might see when looking for through love tokens, there are ones, this is a British one that was not only carved out but enameled. There are ones with little jewels embedded in them. Here's one that was carved on a Bryan dollar of all things. These are 2-cent, 3-cent coins. These are on gold coins. And yes, they do go up to double eagles as far as that goes. It used to be that on eBay, they actually had, I think it was a $2.50 coin dating back to 1832 that was carved into a love token. I'm not sure if it's still up or not, but love tokens can be really neat if you look out for them. You're more casually though, you're more likely to just come across the silver dime ones. Elongated coins, another thing which you're doubtlessly familiar with, but probably not necessarily to this extent. It is commonly recognized that the first elongated coins appeared at the 1893 Columbian Exposition. They do sell for a fair bit these days, certainly more than the more average ones, the kind that you can make today. And they actually have had modern day restrikes. If you take a look at those there, you can see by things like how the date is kind of straight versus kind of bowed out. That's a nice simple way of telling that this is a restrike. People did get creative with these in varying ways. For example, this here I think was sold through Heritage a few years ago. This was a Feuchtwanger cent that was elongated at the New York World's Fair in 1939. While it may or may not be painful to see something like this turn into an elongated coin, it sold for quite a bit more than it would have if it had not been elongated, ironically enough. Elongated coins have been used for many purposes. For example, one of the people who actually creates machines use this for advertising purposes. And every once in a while, if you look long enough, you will see them put out elongated coins that were pressed and turned into trade tokens of all things. Again, much like with the love tokens, you will see them on pretty much anything. This is a bus token, the kind with the little holes in the center that was pressed into service as an elongated coin. We also have things to this effect, a titanium blank. There is somebody who actually sells them as such, and the point of doing that, the point of selling titanium blanks, is that the titanium metal can be anodized to create some nicer colors, and the person selling those, it makes them so that, of course, they can actually be run through the elongated coin pressers. We also have oh, by the way, we also have a club for those. It's called Tech, or the Elongated Collectors. Repousses. One of the best coin dealers I know of, this is one of his favorite things. Repousses, which is French, it means pop out, were first patented in 1903 by a man named William Mallier. There were actually two different kinds, because what would happen originally is they would cut out the center of the coin and solder in a design like Lady Liberty. Later on, another patent ended up being filed by George Kepler, and that was more like this kind of thing here, where what they would do is they would actually stamp the design through into the coin. Now, mind you, when it comes to this kind of stuff, many modern coins do exist, and they are still being made. So you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at these. But older ones can often be distinguished with this kind of thing. It is often possible to distinguish older ones because only the older ones will have that little patent bar on the other side of it, for example. And I'm sure it's not surprising to anybody that the oldest ones like this are the most valuable of them. This here is just an idea of how they went. These are the actual patents. I can't open them up, I don't think, while I'm actually doing the slide, but these are actually now visible to anybody thanks to Google Patents. And there were 5 patents filed by Mallier in 1903, one by Kepler. They expired 100 years ago, but they will actually show you things like this here. Kepler, where we saw that he actually stamped the design into the coin rather than cutting it out. If you look here, I know it's a bit small, but you can always look up the patents themselves. You'll see how in Mallier's design, he cut out the head and replaced it. And just a few more to that effect. There are quite a few neat ones. Many of them are fairly rare and very difficult to get. The Lincoln and Kennedy ones are always very popular, very common, easy enough to get. There are other modern designs, for example, Liberty Bells, Ronald Reagan, those sorts of things. You have foreign ones like Kaiser Wilhelm on a German 2 mark. This one here is Queen Elizabeth II, and that's a South African 1952 halfpenny. Then you have weirder things like this. I mean, this is Lady Liberty, but then this is a British halfpenny coin for, I don't know who came up with that idea, but there it is. You've got things like JP Morgan on the Morgan dollar, go figure. This one here, I think, was related to the Elks Clubs. There are ones out there with Santa Claus on them. Many of the more unusual designs can be quite rare and difficult to find. Trench art. Called very obviously because this kind of stuff was made by soldiers while they were in the trenches. That, of course, suggests World War I, but in general, trench art is believed to have originated around the Napoleonic Wars about a century earlier. You know, when you're in the trenches and you have a chance and you're not doing anything, what would you do? And the answer is, you know, make stuff. And that stuff could be either mementos or it could have some kind of practical purpose. So for example, these are some of the ones. This one here is commemorating being in Belgium. This one here is from El Alamein, and this one is an ashtray, so that had a purpose on top of that. Baghdad from World War I. This particular one, this is the kind of thing where you would have 2 coins, one on the front side and one on the back side, and you would have a lighter that's filled and usable. I actually have, among other things, I have a large bullet, probably about yay big, that has a coin as the bottom and is otherwise was repurposed into a lighter that I imagine worked at one time or another. Lighters are also one of the many things that are common. You will often find bullets in some manner in this because, you know, I'm sure you can imagine bullets and coins are easily the most readily available type of metal available to people in those situations. More to the effect of trench art, this one here is like a little ornament. This here is a British penny. You might see Queen Victoria there, and it's a nice cap. This one here was fashioned to be both a whistle and a spoon, thus the coin is curved a bit. During the Boer Wars, there would often be, I think, propaganda type coins, propaganda type carvings. I've also seen, and I know this was featured in the eSylum recently, which helped me kind of identify the one I had. I've seen coins where they carved Queen Victoria into a Salvation Army outfit. You probably saw that if you read the eSylum bit. Why exactly they do it, I'm not totally sure. This one here was a very interesting rifle that turned up in Australia some years ago, where they actually embedded coins into the rifle, and this dates back to the Boer Wars. Judy Wall is a prolific collector of trench art. You can actually see the type of things that she has at trenchart.net. These are just a few of them, because in her case, because her particular interest is in trench art in general, she has many types of things that are not specifically coin related. Like there are pictures out there, if you look, of leaves where the man carefully carved his children's name into the leaves, for example, diaries, paintings, those sorts of things. These here are just some of the ones that feature coins, like this is a matchbook cover. This one here is a whistle. This one here is a little dice box, and so on and so forth. Kettle pennies. This information, I think, mainly comes through us by way of the penny lady. She seems to be a very prolific collector of these. Kettle pennies are the most common to find, but there were, as you can see, quite a few of this kind of stuff made. These things were made by prisoners in the 1920s to 1930s, and they were, at least supposedly, they were given out to people as souvenirs. We know this because we actually have literature to that effect that at least states as much. It makes me wonder personally if they were prisoners, just how much of that was voluntary, but there are quite a few of this kind of stuff out there. The kettles made out of pennies are by far and away the most common, but there are quite a few. I mean, this one is made out of a dime. This one is a little baseball. There are things like working locks and keys. There are quite a few neat things. It's one of those deals where if you look long enough, you'll manage to find neat things to that effect. Altered surfaces. Most of this kind of stuff are modern creations. You get things like the copper 1943 cent, which is not the actual copper cent, mind you, just copper plated steel. You get these kind of things like enameling and coloring, which is often done for more like jewelry purposes, that sort of thing. You get the racketeer nickels, which are not actually racketeer nickels. Those are often, of course, done just to try and sell the 1883 V nickels that otherwise wouldn't really sell. But in this particular case, in at least one case, this particular one is actually known to be a real racketeer nickel, because this one was unearthed in Deadwood, South Dakota when they were doing renovations. And it is now in, I'm not sure where its exact location is now, in a museum in the local area, I think. So even though the vast majority of what people call racketeer nickels are modern creations, there were at least some that are actually real, and it actually did happen at the time. Shipwrecked coins. These are among the few that coins that will often not be graded as details coins, even though they would be qualified as such, because these are the kind of things which, if you get environmental damage on your coins, they are usually considered details coins if you send them in for professional grading. Then again, you know, these ones were graded genuine, but then this one was actually given a numeric grade. There are quite a few of these around. They will often have to be certified to be considered from the actual shipwreck. I think that probably the easiest one to get a hold of were the pieces of 8 that were sunk off of the Alcazador. They are pretty much have to be professionally graded to be real, so to speak. Quite a few different shipwrecks have been recognized by professional graders. And they come in every type of metal as well. You will have copper, silver, and gold coins. And yes, you can and will find shipwrecked currency. For example, this one here is from the Andrea Doria. From this particular one, which was from the 50s, there were actually quite a few, even though this one here is a silver certificate, it is not the only type of currency that was on that ship. A lot of non-American currencies were on that ship as well. In the background, what you see are sheets that were recovered from the SS Breda. What they were sheets that were watermarked and were intended to be turned into Indian rupees, but it was sunk off of, I think it was the coast of England before they could get to India. They were, of course, recovered in more modern times, and actually sheets of them are out there and available for to be owned. World War II notes. This was a very common thing during World War II, where you were supposed to bring a bill with you when you walked into a bar or something to that effect. And if you forgot your bill, you had to pay for your drinks. If you did have the bill, people would usually trade signatures for them. There are signatures out there that are known to have famous people on them, like there are ones where Jack Benny signed the bill. I think there are ones where President Roosevelt did as well. If this sort of thing went on for long enough, people would actually start taping the notes together and get rolls of this kind of thing that are several feet long. Unfortunately, that was during World War II. What that means is that by today, the tape is around 80 years old or so old. And unfortunately, this kind of thing starts happening. They will fall apart because the tape has gotten that old. That particular note was like that. It was part of one once. Notes would often be sent as little as souvenirs, or kind of like one of the many war trophies you might get from the battlefield. Sometimes it had very grim implications, which you'll see in next slide. On a related note, as far as that goes, during World War II, this kind of thing happened. What happened was that notes were artificially stained and aged to make it look like they were local, to help kind of disguise if you were caught over there during that time. So this is one of the notes that in this particular case, I found this with 3 notes together. This particular soldier wrote on it that he managed to get it from a dead Jap on Marshall Islands. And yes, I'm pretty sure that there is blood on it on this side. This is one of 3 notes that I found together to that effect. So this was one of those grim reminders of what was going on in the battlefield at the time. Mind you, this wasn't quite on the same level as some of the other things that used to happen during this time. When I was looking at that sort of stuff, considering the 3 notes that I had, there was actually a campaign in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands from, it was, I think, December 1944 to February 1945. One of the notes that I had actually said that it was taken in 1945, so it was actually probably from that campaign during this kind of time. On a brighter note, though, sometimes you get notes looking more like this. This one here was a really nice, really pretty Oban that sold through Stacks just this past January. And it was inscribed with a little note saying that it was a gift. The coin itself was minted in the 1860s. It was sent as a gift in 1871. Even then, even for what it is, when it was graded as genuine by PCGS. They would not actually give it a numeric grade because technically, you know, this is technically a damaged coin. In this case, it sold for quite a bit, mind you. Postage stamp currency. And when I say postage stamp currency, I mean it very literally here. A handful of envelopes are known where fractional currency was literally turned into postage stamps. Why they would do that, I'm not totally sure. I guess it was just one of those things that if you had it and didn't think you could redeem it any other way, I guess you used it as such. These kind of things are quite rare at the moment. There are approximately 10 or so known, but they're also relatively new to the numismatic community. Like, people have only kind of recently found that they're a thing. So I think that probably you give it enough time, they will start becoming more common as people just look for them more. Nearly all of them are like this one here. They're kind of Civil War era or post-Civil War era, like this one I think was from the 1880s. But then you have this one here, which is unique for what it is. This here was sent from a man named J.A. Howland in New Jersey to his stepson, who was situated in Ireland a little bit before war broke out in Europe. It was, I think, in February of 1939. On top of the fact that this was considerably later than almost all the others known of this kind, there's the fact that this one actually used 2 postage stamp currencies on here. And also, I know it's hard to read on this particular picture, but that stamp right there on the reverse says from the Franklin D. Roosevelt collection, because at one point President Roosevelt had added this to his very large collection of stamps. This sold through heritage auctions a couple of years ago, this particular one. Modern day creations, these are many of the more, as we get towards the end, this is kind of more recent type stuff. When you get to this point here, the coins become more artsy in nature. There are people out there, for example, who will cut up coins into jigsaw puzzles, cut out the design of the coins to make them look, to make them more independence. There are people who are turning coins into guitar picks. I'm not a musician in any way, so I could not necessarily tell you how easy it is to use them as such, but they're being done as such. This coin was hollowed out to be used as a magician's coin. The coin on my cover, which was a shattered $50, was also done for that purpose, for magical purposes. Coins have also been made into rings in 2 different ways. As you can see here, what would happen here is people would spoon the edges of this quarter to kind of push them up like that and drill the outside. Or on the other hand, what they would do, the other way of making these, you would drill out the center first and then force it down a metal ring to straighten it out as such. And that's how you get the 2 different designs. Like on this particular one with the ring, you can see the edge of the coin, whereas the edge of the coin would be here and have been flattened out at that point. A couple of wearable items. These are kind of miscellaneous items that you may or may not have seen at this point. For example, while the large cents being turned into gears is very well known among the coin community, it seems that these are a bit less known. There are at least a few instances out there where for cowboy spurs, the rowels have been replaced with coins. These particular ones, in this particular one, they were actually using German coins, but of course they used quite a few different types of coins for this kind of stuff. You may have seen this recently in the numismatic news. There was a dog called Oni, and he used to wear a jacket with a lot of medals and the likes on it. This dog, when he died, ended up being stuffed and is now a feature at the National Postal Museum. Then people turn other things into wearable stuff. Let's say this here, for example, is a necklace that was made out of plastic bar and drink tokens. Now, if that sounds tacky as it is, believe you me, if you were to see this in person, it is so much weirder and uglier than you might think it would be. There are quite a few other things to this effect. One of the neater things that I saw, I think last year, I couldn't find the picture again, but if you happen to be familiar with the silk knot geld that was issued in Germany during the 1920s, somebody went out of their way to take an uncut sheet of that silk knot geld and sew it into a vest. I thought the asking price was a little bit too much for such a thing, so I didn't buy it or save the picture at the time. But people will do that sort of thing. You look long enough, you'll see quite a few things to this effect. A couple of miscellaneous items. This here was one of the great mysteries that people were trying to figure out what this was. I think it was Paul Cunningham that decided on what this was. As best as people can tell, this kind of thing here was probably used for quack medicine, which I suppose sounds about right, because we do every so often see, things like Boyd's battery and so on among numismatic items. They think that it may have been meant to create an electric current of some sort, because the shell itself is made out of zinc, and of course this is a silver half-9. This here is a relatively common example, or at least easily available, of an encased coin. The difference between this and most encased coins is that this one is very literally a half of a cent. I think it was meant for advertising purposes, because the token itself says half a cent per acre keeps Milwaukee in repair. This here, I believe, is related to decimalization in 1970, when the British changed to their more recent system of coinage that they use. They, to help people transition over that, I think that they did this. They stamped 1 shilling into this so that people will know what the old versus the new was. That was one of a few different things they did to help accustom people to that pretty important change that they had in 1970. Picture lockets. This one, I think, is the most elaborate of the picture lockets I've seen. What they did was they took this coin here and they very carefully carved George's face out of it and carved a little hole. And the idea was you could put a photograph in there. These were quite small, quite elaborate. This one is a little bit more elaborate and ornate than most. The two that I have were not as nice as this one. I wasn't able to win this particular one. Often the ones that you can and do see out there are actually done with the entire coin being used. Like they'll cut out the entire front of the coin and then put it back, and then that whole obverse will hinge outwards, and you can actually put a photograph in there. This here was a neat and random miscellaneous piece, which I like to think of was really neat. The kanji here actually say Yoko, like Yoko Ono. In other words, it was a name. Considering that it has a fan, and considering that they were made with old Japanese sen, I would personally like to think that this was perhaps a pocket piece that a geisha might have used at some point or another, but I will be the first to admit that I am just speculating as far as that goes. This connects these 2 coins together, and they will swivel in and out if you let them. Authentication. So now I'm going to start wrapping up at this point. As far as if you're looking at some of these stuff, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, can I tell that this kind of stuff is real? And the bad news is, in some ways, none of them are real. In other words, what's to stop me from taking a coin and carving it up and doing it right now? I could do that if I wanted to, right? I could take a nice, bright, uncirculated 1883 nickel, gold-plated, and because it's not circulated, it's going to start looking like it might have been a racketeer nickel in the day. But in other ways, it's possible to authenticate an item if you look at the details. Again, authenticate, mind you, again, it's a relative term for this kind of stuff. The washer large cent, which I featured earlier, When I bought this, the person said he dug it up from a Civil War campsite somewhere in Virginia. I think that this was actually used as a washer because when I got it, well, first off, you can see from here that the hole in it is kind of sloping. It's also hard to see just in the picture and on the single side, but this particular coin actually has a very slight bend to it, and there's a lot of hammering along the coin itself, and the edges have been filed down. Because of little details like that, I think that this coin was actually used as a washer as opposed to, just somebody drilling a hole in a coin. Similarly, this coin, which I found, has somebody carved in it in the Spokane fire. Could that actually be the case? Well, I looked into it to see, and what I found was that the Spokane fire was a very tremendous fire that happened in August of 1889 in Spokane, Washington. The coin itself is actually in very high grade. So the fact that it's dated of the year that the fire happened, is one of the obvious things that you would look for that kind of thing, right? Like if the coin was dated 1890 and the fire happened in 1889, it's obviously not going to be real. But on top of the fact that the coin and the fire happened in the same year, another thing that you might consider is the fact that this coin is in very high grade. It's probably like an AU or something to that effect. Also, if you just take a look at it, like you see the burning on the coin, but then you see some wear on the coin. What that suggests to me is that the fire happened. Somebody managed to retrieve the coin from the fire in the aftermath of it, ended up carving it as a memento to that effect, ended up spending it, then it wore afterwards a little bit, and it pretty soon made its way into somebody's collection. So in other words, everything about that coin makes sense if it was true. So that's the kind of thing you would want to try and think of as far as, is this real? One more time, though, I will say it, authentic can very much be a relative term. I've seen lighters out there, the kind where we saw with the coins on both sides, where one side said was a penny from 1917. And I went, oh, okay, World War I lighter. Then I looked at the other side of that lighter and the penny was 1942. So, you do have to be careful about the types of assumptions you think, because there often are assumptions, and you do have to keep that kind of thing in mind. So some closing remarks. I think I'm hoping that my point comes across at this point as far as what it means to collect. For starters, a lot of what you've seen here today has been about concrete thinking. In other words, think, why would we cut silver coins down into smaller coins? Because the silver in the coin actually meant something. We are so far removed from that kind of concrete thinking these days that we don't even think about things like nickels and dimes. If you were to look at our nickels and dimes in a bubble and think about nothing else, they actually don't make any sense at all, because they're the exact same material, and yet the nickel is considerably larger and yet only has half the face value of a dime, right? Because of course, these days we only think in the abstract when it comes to coins and what they're supposed to be worth. Keep in mind, do not forget this, a certain amount of faith is required to consider these pieces real. Part of the things that help are the details, some of which I just went over, and other things that help are things like prices. Often the price of the damaged coin, these can often be bought for less than the price of an undamaged coin. Not always by any means, but very often so. And that's the kind of thing which also helps kind of protect the authenticity of the type of coins that there are out there to this effect. A lot of these coins and derivatives of them that you've seen today are literally unique in the sense that if they're being handmade, no two of them will be alike, though many of them, again, were commercially made, so of course many of them are not unique. And my final point that I would say to the effect of damaged goods is, while you are told that you should not be, you should avoid damaged coins, depending on how you think or interpret it, anything can be considered collectible, depending on how you collect and what you think of for your collection, how you decide to organize it, and that sort of thing. So that is my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It looks like we have 2 questions so far. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A and I will read them out loud. So the first one, do chop marks on trade dollars affect the value?
So chop marks are going to, they are often actually pretty desirable these days, because I would like to think that they, how shall we say, add to the flavor of the coin. Like they will tell you that it was a sign of what it was supposed to be used for. That's the big thing with that kind of thing. The one that I showed you picture-wise, the one that was an old Anax holder, I'm told that those kind of things, which they will regrade and reholder these days, are actually quite valuable in the old holder because they're a sign of those times. But yeah, they're often quite desirable as far as that kind of stuff goes.
Okay, next one. What is the difference between cleaning a coin properly and an improperly cleaned coin? Which one loses more value?
Well, there's no really proper way of cleaning a coin. Usually the only acceptable way of cleaning a coin is when you dip it. In other words, when you put like polish to remove like the tarnishing from more recent silver coins. That's usually the only type that people accept as reasonable. Otherwise, everyone is called, everyone is considered improperly clean, so to speak. If you think about it in the context of my presentation, what you'd want to think to yourself is, was it clean with a reason? Was it just me in the 50s or 60s? Back in those days, it was more popular to brighten up and shine up your coins. If you're thinking about that, the answer is you don't want that. But if there was some like historical reason or some other context, then you'd want to think about that sort of thing.
Okay, next one. I have a couple of oddities I don't know how to value. One is a $1 educational note that was signed with a quill pen in the margin as from the McKinley campaign in 1896. Would this add or detract from the value of the note? I also have an 1823 Series 1 large note that was altered to look like a $5 bill. To the casual eye, it looks pretty good. I suspect it was done during the period in an attempt to pass as a $5 note during hard times. Would it just be considered graffiti or possibly worth something?
I don't know as much about currencies as I do about coins. My thinking is when it comes to that sort of stuff, you'd have to check it and have some kind of indication that it's genuine. It probably is. It sounds as much like it was real. In that case, from a numismatic perspective, it would be considered damaged. But if it really is that, if it was really related to the McKinley campaign, it's probably worth something to somebody who would consider it for a specialized collection. That kind of thing. So then it becomes a matter of, well, you start thinking to yourself, well, who would actually be willing to buy it? I think there would be plenty of serious collectors who would look at that kind of thing and go, oh, that's a pretty novel thing. It relates to the history of the time. So it would be worth something to someone. As far as how it would compare to an original note without that, I couldn't necessarily say. The other one, if it was a contemporary counterfeit, there are people who collect contemporary counterfeits, and sometimes the contemporary counterfeits can and will end up being worth more than the actual coins of the time, which is, that's the way collecting works. That it would depend on the specific context of that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that I would not know. I could probably, if you send like an email or contact information, I do know people I can ask about currencies that are much more knowledgeable than I am. And they might be able to get an answer for you in some way or another.
Okay, next question. What was the link to the Hobo Nickel Club? That's the Hobo Nickel Society?
Yeah. So it's hobonickels.org, HOBONICKELS.org.
I think that there's more in the chat. Okay, I got a Florida America the Beautiful quarter damaged. Is it valuable to collect?
Probably not. The vast majority, I mean, it might depend on what it is. I have, for example, with the state quarters, often people turn them into more jewelry-like items. Like people would gild them, people would cover them with the prismatic coloring. I'm not sure what exactly it is. I've seen people like coin shops local try and sell those and nobody buys them because the type of people who would walk into a coin shop are the type of people who would not care for that kind of thing. Even so, they are also very common because that's the way that the state quarters go. Other thing to consider is this. So, I'm not sure what exactly you're referring to. If you're referring to that, then that's your answer. Other thing to keep in mind is if it's just a quarter that looks like it was run over in a parking lot or was broken or heavily scratched in any way, that kind of thing is not going to be valuable in any sense. It will be worth its face value because there's no historic context behind that, nothing noteworthy about it collecting-wise.
Okay, perfect. Thank you again, Vic. That was a wonderful and educational presentation. And thank you again to our partners, Graysheet, for supporting ANA eLearning Academy, as well as our educational mission. I look forward to seeing you guys again. Thank you, Vic.